I have to admit, I didn't expect this turn of events. My car wasn't running well. It needed to be serviced, and I didn't have the money to do it. Maybe I shouldn't be driving it, but I had no choice. I closed the door and saw the looks from the people around me as I got out of the car. My BMW didn't belong in this neighborhood. I headed towards the Secretary of State's office. As I entered the office, probably oriented by the way I was dressed, the security guard pointed me to the lane to renew my license. I shook my head, and he looked at me puzzled. "Do you need another picture?" he asked. I shook my head in the negative. "What are you here for?" he asked. Almost every head in the crowded office turned to listen. Most of them didn't even have the decency to pretend they weren't interested. "I'm here to register for public assistance," I said quietly. "Well, welfare. So I have no income or money and I'm going to starve to death, welfarist? Or did they just come and throw me and all my stuff out of the shitty apartment I moved into after being evicted from the house I thought I was going to live in for the rest of my life? Is that welfare? Or maybe the fact that I can't find a goddamn job to save my ass because no one will hire me is welfare?" "Calm down, lady," he said in a nervous voice. "Half the people in this office are registering or dealing with Social Security. I know what you need. Go in there and take one of these forms. Fill it out completely and drop it in the drawer by the counter. Then sit down and you'll get a call." "How long will it take them to call me?" I asked. "Not very long," he replied. "No more than 2 or 3 hours." He wasn't kidding. People were asleep, waiting for the call. There was a rack of magazines in the corner, but it was empty. I got the impression that most of the magazines were not returned when those who read them were done with them. Everyone present looked at me. I knew they were wondering why the hell a person dressed like me was here. It's a long and rather amusing story. It all started exactly 2 years after next Tuesday. My name is Melinda Conrad. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking my name sounds an awful lot like Mel Conrad, that guy who got rich last year and gives all his money to charities and stuff. Well, you're right. He is my husband. Okay, technically, he's my ex-husband. And you know what else? I made a bad deal. I am directly responsible for this man becoming a freaking gazillionaire with nothing to show for it. Okay, maybe I'm not directly responsible, but if I hadn't forced him to divorce me, he wouldn't be rich, so I deserve some credit, don't I? 2 years ago, we were happy as hell. We weren't rich. We were a typical, ordinary, everyday middle-class family. My husband, Melvin Conrad, my daughter, Melissa Conrad, and I were like three peas in a pod. We were a very close-knit family. We had a great house. That's what I got pushed out of. Then I had to move into that shitty apartment I just got evicted from. But anyway, let's get on with the story. All three of us loved each other like there was no tomorrow. My husband wasn't very interesting, but he was nice enough and loved me. He worked very hard to provide for our family. And like I said, we were comfortable. Our daughter was just finishing her freshman year at a state university when it hit me. There are so many names for the same thing these days, but you know the one I had. Some call it a midlife crisis, others call it a hormonal imbalance, others call it empty nest syndrome. These are all great names for the spoiled woman who gets bored, does stupid things, and usually regrets it. Sometimes it affects men too, so you guys shouldn't feel superior or immune to it. If you see a balding 40-year-old man driving a damn sports car with a 20-year-old blonde next to him, chances are he has this disease. Anyway, I invited my husband over for dinner because I had something I needed to tell him. I had done something terrible and I needed to lighten the mood. I'm decent looking, to say the least. At 40, I was still capable of wrinkling my nose on a good day. I'm a little heavier than I was when we first met, but that's okay. Mel loved me so much and I was such a fool. He showed up a little late, no more than 5 minutes late, and I didn't beat him up for it. He smiled at me. His face still lit up like a Christmas tree every time he saw me. You'd think we hadn't seen each other for weeks, but it was really just that morning. I was very nervous when he wrapped his arms around me and hugged me. Butterflies fluttered in my stomach. Something told me I was doing a BFM. He sat down across from me. The look on his face expressed absolute joy. I was sure he thought it was a good sign. I hated to part with the man I had lived with, loved, and raised my daughter with for over 20 years, but there was no choice. It was either him or my happiness. "How was your day, dear?" he asked. Damn him. After all, he was the one who'd gone and worked all day. What did he think I did all day? Did he really think I was working on a cure for cancer or trying to solve the Middle East crisis? I woke up at 9 and loaded the dishwasher, threw the laundry in the washer, and my day was half over. Mel, I want a divorce, I told him. He spit out the stream of water he'd just drunk right in my face. I'm sure it was an accident, but it ruined my makeup and hair. I sat like that with water and saliva running down my face while he tried to catch his breath. Are you serious? He asked quietly. Very, I replied, with as much dignity as I was capable of, considering I looked like a raccoon and my waterproof mascara had proven once and for all that it wasn't waterproof. He stood up, wiped his mouth, and said, "You'll be contacted by my attorney." The pain and heartache on his face just stunned me. I felt like the lowest scumbag on earth. Everything inside me, every fiber of my being was telling me to get on my knees and tell him it was just a joke. But I didn't move from my seat. He turned to leave, dropping a few bills on the table. Wait a minute, Mel, I said. This isn't what was supposed to happen. Don't you want to talk about it and ask me some questions? Don't we need to discuss how the divorce is going to go? He turned to me, looked at me curiously, and asked, "Why?" I was shocked. I had replayed all of this in my head over 100 times, and not one of them had this reaction. He didn't get angry or cry. He didn't demand an explanation or threaten me. He just accepted my words and moved on. What will this do? Will it make me feel better? Will it make you feel different? I doubt all of that. I'm pretty sure that if you're doing this, it means you've found someone else and you want to be with him. The way I felt about you obviously wasn't enough to change your mind, though it wouldn't have mattered. If you're acting like this, it means you've already slept with him, right? I nodded my head and said, "But—" He interrupted me. "That means you're no longer of interest to me," he said coldly. "Okay, do you need any questions? Do I need to take a DNA test, or is Melissa mine?" "God, Mel," I said. "For God's sake, of course she's yours. What do you take me for?" "You're not likely to like the answer to that question," he said. "Goodbye, Melinda." Then he turned and walked away. He didn't seem to be as angry or upset as I thought he would be. "Damn it, Mel," I yelled after him. "Won't you even try to fight for me?" My voice echoed throughout the restaurant. He turned again and, from 3 tables away, he relayed his answer. "Why, Melinda?" he asked. "I can't change the way you feel. Who am I to try to explain to you that your feelings are wrong? Obviously, you don't love me the way I love you. If I did, it wouldn't work. Since you don't love me anymore, I have to forget you and move on. Besides, I only fight for what I want. And after what you said tonight, it's not about you anymore. Have a nice life. I have no intention of standing in your way." And everyone in the restaurant stared at me as Mel headed for the door. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I'd read about a similar sensation. They say it occurs when someone walks over the ground you'll be buried under. I guess what it really means is that, like I said, I did a BFM. Both my heart and my head were screaming at me about it, but I couldn't listen to them. I called the waiter over and asked him where the ladies' room was. When I got home that evening, I realized by the empty drawers and closet that my husband was gone. All chances of making things right had been exhausted. I had the worst headache imaginable. I picked up my cell phone and called Greg. He would make me feel better. "Yeah," he answered. "It's me," I said. I told him. "Cool," he said. "How did he take it? Did he yell and try to beg you to stay with him? Did he beat you on your hands and feet?" "No," I said. "He just stood up and walked away from me. He was very calm. Under the circumstances, he took it very well." "Do you want me to come over and shake the brains out of you?" he asked. "No," I replied. "I just broke off a 20-year relationship with a man who worshipped the ground I walked on. I think I need to be alone." "Okay, I'll see you later," he said, and hung up. I think it was at that moment that I realized I had underestimated my BFM. I knew all the reasons I wanted a divorce. Greg was younger, much younger, and he made me feel alive. At 29, Greg was 11 years younger than me and 9 years older than my daughter. He was wild and uninhibited. He was everything Mel wasn't. I crouched on the edge of our huge double bed. When I looked at the bed, it had never seemed so big and so empty. I poured myself a glass of wine and wondered what new direction my life would take from now on. Sometime around midnight, tossing and turning and unable to sleep, I pulled out one of our old photo albums and looked through some of Mel and I's memories over 22 years. The next morning was even worse. I woke up and wondered why this was bothering me. I sat at my desk and just watched a cup of my favorite coffee turn to room temperature sludge. I don't know why I didn't move, but I had no reason to do anything about it. I mentally replayed in my head the conversation with Mel from the night before and the conversation with Greg. At the beginning of the evening, Mel had looked at me like the sun was shining out of my ass. By the end of the evening, he was looking at me in a completely different way. He looked at me the way one looks at a problem or a project at work, like I was just another problem that needed to be solved to end the day, and Greg blew it. He should have offered to just come over and give me a hug or be with me. When someone is going through a severe emotional loss, they need to know that someone cares about them. I knew Greg was young, so I gave him a break. Preparing him to be the person I thought he could be was a big part of the excitement. I knew I had caused Mel a lot of pain. That was what made me feel so bad, but I was sure he would be okay in the end. Who was I kidding? I knew he would be miserable without me. But at that moment, I was only thinking about my feelings. My term of service was coming to an end. Hell, I'd given this man the best years of my damn life. We had done our part in the breeding of the species. We raised a child. Our duty to society was over. It was time to have some fun. I wanted to be happy, but I didn't want to wait for the golden years. Why not be happy while I was still young enough to know what happiness was? The morning after her story, I woke up in my hotel room. At first, I didn't realize where I was. The room was dark and the sheets smelled different. They smelled like antiseptic, medicine. So I guess they were clean enough. They didn't have that odor that comes after weeks of washing with store-bought soap, or the traces of liquids, farts, tears, and spilled food that someone had tried to wash off of them. In other words, they didn't smell like love. I sat up on the bed and remembered where I was and why I was here before I messed up and reached for her. My mind remembered that she wouldn't be here, but my body and heart still missed her. EGBDF, I said to myself, and prepared myself for what I would have to do. I had a lot of things to do before I could allow myself to sink into the depression I knew was just around the corner. I thought about giving up everything and just staying here to be miserable. But eventually, I would have to go outside. And today was as good a day as any to do so. Before I turned on the light and tore the blanket of darkness I'd pulled over me so I couldn't see the tears, I made a list of things I needed to do today. I needed to call my lawyer. The one I usually dealt with didn't do divorce or family law. Perhaps he could recommend someone. I needed to find a more permanent residence. I was probably leaning toward either giving Melinda the house or selling it. Whatever was best for me, I didn't feel I needed to make decisions based on Melinda's needs or comfort. I needed to call my daughter to make sure she could always reach me. I wasn't going to make her choose between me and a slut. But I also wanted her to know that I still wanted to be as big a part of her life as she would allow me to be. I needed to separate Melinda from myself financially. Let the judge and lawyers sort it out, but I wouldn't give her a penny more than I owed her. At the same time, I needed to make sure my assets remained mine. We also had a few social obligations that I had to tactfully inquire about. I wasn't going to become a hermit, but I didn't want to date anyone. Nor did I want to try to become a parody of myself, pretending everything was fine while the shards of my broken heart told me it wasn't. With these thoughts in mind, I called my father-in-law to talk about the barbecue we were supposed to go to on their anniversary weekend. "Hey, Bob," I said when he picked up the phone. "Mel, what's up?" he asked. "You're still bringing the Dos Equis, aren't you?" "Bob, that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about," I said. "I'd really like to congratulate you and Jean on your anniversary. Your marriage is something I'd like to have when I'm your age. But I won't be able to make it on Saturday, so I was hoping you'd let me take you two out to dinner Friday night." "Stuck at work?" he said. "I remember those days. Don't let yourself get upset, Mel, so we're going on a double date? It's been a while since I've been on one. Sounds like fun. Maybe you'll let me do a couple dances with your wife. I've always liked younger women." "Bob, it'll just be me and you two here. I'm not seeing anyone right now. But if you feel uncomfortable, just tell me, and I'll send you a gift or something," I said. "Mel, what the hell is going on?" he asked. "Your voice hasn't sounded right since you started that damn phone call." "Bob, your daughter took me out to dinner last night," I said. "While we were there, she told me she wants a divorce. She's found someone else and wants to be with him." "What?" he exclaimed. What did she do? There must be something else going on? Have you done something to her? Are you cheating on her? No, sir, I said quietly. Mel, I'm going to have to call you back. I need to, he began. Please, Bob, I don't want to make a fuss. I'm sure she'll tell you herself in her own time, I said. I don't want to cause trouble or detract from the event in any way. We should be celebrating the fact that you've been married for 45 years. We should be honoring those who survived, not fretting over those who didn't. I'll call you next week and then we can talk. I just don't want you or Jean to think I don't realize how special what you two have built is. 1 minus 1 minus 1 minus 1 minus 1 minus 1, I thought, dialing my daughter Melissa's number. Fortunately for me, she was away from her cell phone. I suppose I could have dialed her cell number, but I didn't really feel like talking to her. I just left my number and let her know that she could call me on it, or my work number, from now on. One more call, and I got a referral to a divorce attorney. The woman seemed angry on the phone, but agreed to meet with me later that morning. I pulled out my laptop and started looking at condos and apartments. Most of them were the same, except for the prices. Somehow, I didn't see the benefit of buying a condo in a building you'll never own. I think I'll want to buy another building eventually, so renting was fine with me. Hell, I might even end up buying Melinda out of our building. I took a quick shower and dressed in my usual business clothes. I'm not much for ties, but a sweater and sports jacket suited me. I decided to also purchase a gym membership. After all, I have to get my property in order if I'm going to try to get another woman interested enough to jump at my chance. I walked outside and smiled for the first time since Melinda walked past me yesterday. There was a woman standing in the hotel parking lot with a little boy. She was struggling to pull him away from my Mustang. There used to be 3 things that made me smile every time I saw them. 1, my wife Melinda. The second was my daughter Melissa. And the last one is my '09 Mustang GT. Every time I look at this car, I smile and shake my head. It takes me back to my childhood when I used to roll my Hot Wheels cars all over our living room floor. The commute to work was always a pleasure, and today was no different. It was a chance to focus on something other than feeling like crap for a while. I walked into my office and my assistant Joyce pounced on me like a hound on a fox. Melinda has already called you twice this morning, she said. She says she can't get through to your cell phone. Joyce, have a seat, I said, pointing her to the chair behind my desk. She sat down and smiled broadly. Have you finally realized that I'm the reason for your success and decided to reward me on my own merits? She asked. Joyce was not only my assistant, but also my friend. We had been together for so long that it seemed as if we were related. Joyce, do you remember the dinner I had to leave this place in a hurry last night for? I asked. She nodded her head. I bet someone got lucky last night, she said. Well, if anyone got lucky, it wasn't me, I said. All I got was a kick in the teeth. Melinda told me she wants a divorce. Joyce looked at me and saw that I couldn't help myself. What a bitch, she said. Guess you didn't expect this turn of events, huh? I shook my head. Joyce stood up and pushed me into a chair. She stroked my shoulders and tried to express sympathy. If you need anything, let me know, she said. For now, I won't ask you to lie. Can't you just tell her the truth? Tell her I'm not returning her calls, I said. Joyce looked at me and nodded. I realized she wanted to ask more. Everyone always wants to know all the details, but she realized I didn't want to talk about it. She was kind and smart enough not to push. Just before lunch, I picked up a file folder in which I put copies of all my financial documents. I left the office and went to meet with my attorney. Her office turned out to be nothing like I expected. I guess I thought it would be a large office building and that either the entire building or most of it would be owned or leased by a large law firm. I was wrong on both counts. It was a small one-story office that was part of a shopping center. Next to the office on one side was a small medical clinic. The other side was occupied by a Fredericks of Hollywood franchise. Farther down the strip was a liquor store. All of the businesses seemed to be thriving. The difference in the types of businesses seemed odd to me at first, until I thought about it. Upon reflection, I realized that there was actually one business missing here. If you're having marital problems, you could come here and buy your wife some lingerie. You could plan a nice romantic evening and buy something at Fredericks to spice it up. If that doesn't work, you have a handy divorce lawyer. You'll find out she cheated on you and head to the clinic to get tested for STDs, and then to the liquor store to drown your sorrows. Shopping at the mall was quick, Easy and convenient. The only thing missing is a therapist or marriage counselor. Maybe a detective agency and gun store would be nice too. I opened the door and stepped inside. A pleasant older woman asked who I was and the purpose of my visit. Melvin Conrad to see Ann Wilson, I said. I have an appointment for noon. She smiled and told me to take a seat, and Miss Wilson would be right with me. The woman was at least 60 years old, but she was still stunning. No sooner had I lowered myself into the chair than Ann Wilson opened the door to her office and gestured for me to come in. Ann Wilson was a large woman with long black hair and piercing blue eyes. She looked at me with the same gaze that all predators use to study possible prey. Tell me a story, she said. This statement surprised me. I looked at her in bewilderment. She only raised one eyebrow and continued to look at me. Okay, I said. Once upon a time there were 3 little pigs. Very funny, she smirked. Tell me about your divorce and the reasons for it, Mr. Conrad. Time is money. I don't want to waste yours or mine, but it's highly unlikely I'll take your case. My shoulders slumped, and I began to tell her the protracted story of my marriage to Melinda. When I got to the story of dinner the night before, she hissed and sucked in air. Wait, she said sharply. What did she do? She took us to dinner at her favorite restaurant and told us she wanted a divorce because she'd found a new man. And she'd already had sex with him, I said. Miss Wilson stood up. Did you ever cheat on her? She asked, and leaned over and looked at me intently. Never, ma'am, I answered. What did you do when she told you that? She asked. Ma'am, there was nothing I could do. I left money on the table for her dinner, in case she decided to eat. Then I went home. I packed my clothes and checked into a hotel, I said. Miss Wilson shook her head. That was not the most sensible thing to do. Your departure will probably enable her to settle in the house temporarily until we come to an agreement. Is the house in your name, her name, or both? She asked, quickly jotting things down in her notebook. In my name, I said. Melinda doesn't work out of our house. Then why the hell did you leave? She asked, shaking her head. You're as bad as women get, Jesus. She tossed the notebook across the room and looked at me. For a moment, I got the same feeling my third-grade teacher had when she tried to get me to learn the times table of numbers. That feeling of, damn, how many times are we going to have to do this? It was as if Miss Wilson expected me to know the ins and outs of divorce laws and procedures. I stood up, and she turned her head on her neck to meet my fierce gaze again. Where are you going? She growled. Well, I figured you didn't want my business because I'm doing it all wrong, I said. In the same instant, her gaze softened and she pressed a button on her desk. She spoke into the intercom and ordered her assistant, who was also her aunt, to bring a cart. A gorgeous older woman entered the office with a cart full of coffee and fresh donuts. Miss Wilson poured herself a cup and took 2 donuts. I took a cup of black coffee myself. You've done nothing wrong, Mr. Conrad, she said. That's why I got so angry. I don't usually represent men in divorce cases because they usually turn out to be wrong. The typical scenario involves a man who has cheated on his wife many times, usually with some trophy woman. When his wife gets fed up, he tries to rape her in the divorce and leave her penniless and homeless. I have developed a reputation for getting my clients the best terms in divorce, and now many men are trying to use me to get better terms, even though I don't think they deserve it. Why the hell should they get their cake and eat it too? If they cheat and destroy a marriage, they should pay for it. You've worked your whole life supporting this woman. You've provided her with a good life and home, judging by your address and the fact that your daughter is in college. From examining your financial records, I can see that you have been a good provider. And finally, you're not a very good actor, Mr. Conrad. You try to act like this is all well and fine, but I can see that it has devastated you and you are just trying to move on with your life. Hell, you're still too shaken up to be angry. And the pain isn't even gone yet. And what scares me the most is that you're not even trying to fight what she wants. She says she wants a divorce. You didn't even force her to file for divorce. You did it because she asked for it. She's the one cheating, and you come home and move out of the house you worked on instead of telling her to leave. She should have moved in with her lover, or her parents if they're still alive. Mr. Conrad, I will certainly take your case. Someone has to protect you, if only to keep you from giving her everything you have. We spent the rest of the day going over my financial records and the value of our assets to determine how best to proceed. Several times, Miss Wilson looked at me like I was a fool and asked questions like, "So you want to just give her the house for free and you'll pay the mortgage yourself?" In other words, do you want to pay for her to live there with the guy she's having fun with? Well, probably not, I said. But inside me, the effect of her words was already starting to take effect. "Why are you giving her almost all of your savings?" she asked. "Well, she needs money to live," I said. "She doesn't have a job. It's just money. I can always make more." I felt like Ms. Wilson was about to slap me. She doesn't have a job because she's sat on her ass most of her life while you supported her. She has a college degree, so she can get a job. She herself wanted a change in her life. Let's give her that opportunity. I think we should split 60-40 in your favor. We will pay her alimony for 6 months and no more. All other assets should be split 50-50, including the house, and you will get your 401k, she said. I walked out of the office in a state of shock. I had no idea it would turn out to be so complicated. Miss Wilson gave me the name of a good real estate company to put the house on the market. She decided it was best to put the house on the market. Normally, a woman was allowed to keep the house until the children reached adulthood. Our daughter was already living on campus, so there was no need to delay the sale. And since I didn't need Melinda's permission to sell the house, the sooner I put it on the market, the sooner this whole thing would be over. I drove back to my office, and as I pulled up, I saw Melinda's car in the parking lot. I saw her get out of the car and drove off. I still wasn't ready to talk to her. When I woke up in the morning, I felt like crap about what had happened between me and Mel. I decided that maybe I should just talk to Mel about it. I needed to let him know that I didn't mean to hurt him. I just needed to move on with my life. I tried calling him, but he wouldn't pick up. I tried calling his office, and Joyce told me at first that he wasn't there yet. I realized what I had done was stupid. Mel never came to the office early. He always told me that every minute away from me was torture, so sitting in his office when he could be with me was pointless. I called back after 9 in the morning and asked Joyce if he had arrived. She finally said he was there but wasn't returning my calls. I had a hard time understanding that. "Is he really busy, Joyce?" I asked. "No busier than usual," she replied. "In fact, I don't think he's that busy." "Then can I talk to him?" I asked. In all the years Joyce had worked for Mel, I had never once heard her act or speak less politely. I'd seen her talk to difficult clients and remain calm until anyone else would have hung up on her. "Damn it, Melinda," she'd yell. "He doesn't want to talk to you. What did you expect? You ripped his heart out and then you want to talk. If you want my opinion, he's lucky he got rid of you. Don't call here again." Then she hung up. I didn't even think about the fact that Mel might not be happy. He looked fine last night. But it was actually good for both of us. The fact that he didn't want to talk to me hurt me. I was about to call Joyce back and remind her that she worked for Mel, not the other way around. And it was up to him to decide if I could call him or not, when suddenly my phone beeped. There was another call waiting for me. I picked up the phone and heard my mom's voice. "Melinda, what the hell is going on with you?" she asked. "What do you mean, Mom?" I asked. "Your dad said you and Mel have something going on," she replied. "Do I need to go over there and figure it out?" "You don't need to figure anything out, Mom," I said. "Melissa's all grown up now, and I just feel like I need to move on. I'm young enough to do something else with my life. I'm bored. I need to spread my wings and fly." "Melinda, do something else? I know exactly what you mean, don't you?" she asked. "Melinda, do you remember my sister, your Aunt Kathy?" she asked. I just hummed to let her know I had heard her. "When Kathy was about your age, she started having fun with just about everyone. Eventually, her husband found out about it. He made Katie sleep on a cot in the basement for a year." "Mom, what does this have to do with me?" I asked. "Tell Mel that your father and I will get you a cot," she said. "Mom, it doesn't," I said. "Mel and I will be happier." "That man loves you," she snapped back. "You won't find anyone else who loves you that much," your father said, his voice sounding like he could barely stand on his feet. "How could you do that to the man who cared for you most of your life?" "Mom, he'll get over it," I said. Then she started muttering something to herself about stupid kids and hung up. I started to realize that everyone was trying to paint me as the bad guy, just because I wanted to get out of a bad situation. What was I supposed to do? Sacrifice my happiness on the altar of St. Mel's. Screw that idea. I moved on. It was Friday. I was going out with Greg that evening. I was excited because for the first time I didn't have to hide. But I wanted to clear the air with Mel, so I decided to go to his house. The guards at the building wouldn't let me inside. I felt Joyce's hand. Just as I was getting into my car, Mel's Mustang pulled into the parking lot. I got out of the car and waved at him. He pulled out of the parking lot and drove off. I was so used to him being happy to see me at any time that I just sat there in shock. I went home to get ready for my date. I showered and used my favorite bath scents and perfume. I wanted to drive Greg crazy. I wore a dress that I really liked. It was a deep blue color that looked really good against my long brown hair and blue eyes. I'd had the dress for a long time, but it still looked good on me. Maybe not as good as when I was 30, but I never complained. I spent a lot of time doing my hair and makeup. I wanted Greg to be truly proud to have me in his arms. I had to let people know that he had a reason to be with me and not some 25-year-old hottie. I had just finished brushing my hair when the door slammed shut. A lot of thoughts ran through my head. I thought that maybe Mel was back and angry. I got up from the table and went to see who it was. "Mom, are you crazy?" my daughter Melissa screamed. She ran up the stairs and looked at me like I was crazy. "Where's my daddy?" From the look on her face, you'd think I'd killed him. I, I, I don't know, Lisa, I stammered. We ended up having a long argument about what I was doing. Why the hell does everyone think I'm making a mistake? "Don't you dare talk to me like that, young lady," I yelled at her. I needed to regain control of the situation. "I'm your mother, and you need to treat me with respect. If you can't do that, then maybe you shouldn't come to my house or expect me to continue paying for your education. Mom, if you acted like you deserved respect, I would give it to you. Right now, I think your hormones are out of balance and you're ruining your life. If I didn't love you and want the best for you, I'd just let you piss in the wind. On the other hand, this is my house too, and Daddy paid for it, not you. Daddy also pays for my schooling, not you." Just as I was about to respond to her words, the doorbell rang. She walked to the door and opened it. She stared at Greg as if he had just flown in from Mars. "What can I do for you?" she asked. "I'm Greg, baby," he said. "Greg who, baby?" she asked, looking at him strangely. "What kind of name is Greg, baby?" "Mom, you're kidding, right?" she asked. "I have to take you to the doctor." "Come on in, Greg," I said, looking past her. "And who is this lovely creature?" Greg asked, keeping his eyes on Melissa from the moment she appeared. "Greg Martin, meet my daughter, Melissa Conrad," I said. Greg held out his hand to Melissa. "Don't bother, Fonzie," she snapped back. "You won't be here long. Mom, can I talk to you upstairs?" She grabbed my hand and dragged me up the stairs. "You can't be serious," she said. "How old is he, 25? "He's 29, I said. "And what does he do for a living?" she asked. I didn't know, so I shrugged. "Melissa, we can talk about all this later," I said. "When I get home from my date, we'll sit down and talk about all of this." "Mom, I won't be here," she said. "I'm not going to stay in this house until either you come to your senses or Dad decides to come back to us." Then she left, slamming the door goodbye. I went downstairs, determined not to let her ruin my evening. "Where are we going, Greg?" I asked. Greg's car wouldn't start. He had to start the car twice on the way to my house, so I drove us. We ended up at the rundown club he wanted to go to. He danced with me once, and with many other people, including dancing with 2 male friends a couple times. He didn't introduce me to any of his friends. My dress was ruined when someone spilled beer on it. By the time we left, I had no money left. I drove us back home. Greg went inside, and we spent the rest of the evening pleasantly. Waking up early in the morning, I found Greg moving his stuff into my house. "We're going to be very happy, baby," he purred. I was a little angry because he hadn't asked my permission to move, but upon reflection, I realized that all couples go through these little arguments and disagreements. I told him about the barbecue at my parents' house, and he said he wasn't going. That's how our first fight started. I couldn't believe the day had gone so badly. Maybe it was because I was comparing him to Mel. It wasn't fair to either of them. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, Mel showed up. I heard the rumble of his car and I knew it was him. I ran down the stairs to try and prevent a confrontation. I saw the two of them standing on the porch talking. Then Mel turned and walked away before I could speak to him. I ran down the driveway calling for him, but he didn't even slow down. What did he want? I asked. He's a nice guy, Greg said, and his car's pretty damn cool. He just told me to treat you well and hope we'd be happy. He stopped by to pick up some more of his stuff. He said he came now because he thought we'd be at your parents' house by now. He said something about us having to move out soon. What? I asked. What are you talking about? Why are you yelling at me? He asked. He left, and when I walked into the house, he was lying with his feet up on my white linen couch drinking a beer. I just looked at him. I'll go with you to your parents' house if you let me throw a party, he said. He explained to me that he wanted to invite a few of his friends to introduce them to me and let them see how happy we would be. I was so happy that he suggested we go to a barbecue at my parents' house that I immediately agreed. I was also pleased that we seemed to be inclined to compromise and make decisions as equals. It was a big step in our relationship. I won't go into details, but my parents and most of my family and friends hated Greg. My dad ended up kicking him out of the house. In fact, my dad just told him to get out. It was my brother-in-law who grabbed him by the collar and frog marched him to the door. I told my father that he was wrong to make Greg leave. He said I could go with him. I told him he was making a big deal out of it. All Greg did was fart loudly a few times and tell a few stupid jokes. He was just trying to be friendly in an unfamiliar situation with a group of people he didn't know. Maybe he was a little loud and not politically correct, but I was going to spend the rest of my life with him, so they needed to adjust. When we got back to the house, I noticed that more of Mel's things were gone. He had left me a card with his lawyer's name and number on it so I could give the information to my lawyer. I didn't have one yet. Saturday night, Greg and I stayed home. He invited a few people over and they sat around playing games on the video game system he had set up on my TV. I was alone most of the night until they left. Then Greg and I made love and he fell asleep. Monday, I woke up and asked Greg if he needed to go to work or something. I wanted to take the time to clean the house. It hadn't been this mess since Melissa was in her teens and had a party. That's when I found out Greg was on hiatus, or, in other words, unemployed. The doorbell rang and Greg answered it. "It's for you, babe," he called out. I stumbled down the stairs, still trying to figure out the parameters of my new relationship. I noticed Greg staring intently at the man standing by the door. As I approached the door, I saw a young woman sitting there. She was in her early 20s and quite pretty. At her feet was one of those thin briefcases, and in her hands she held a file folder. She was chewing gum and looked bored. It looked like she was selling magazine subscriptions or something to earn some money for school. She looked up at me as I approached her and asked me my name. I was sure she had gotten my name from one of those lists on the internet. The companies that make these lists buy and sell addresses and names to sell you products that, judging by your history, you'll be interested in. "Melinda Conrad?" she asked in a bored voice. "Yes," I said, "but I didn't—" "You've been served with a subpoena," she said. She handed me a stack of papers and before I could ask anything else, turned and walked away. She was still crunching her gum and looking in her briefcase for another folder. She looked at her watch, got in her car, and drove away. I looked at the document she gave me. I guess I expected Mel to just sit there and wait for me to decide for myself how we were going to get a divorce. Obviously, he didn't see it that way. The card he'd left the day before with his lawyer's information was still lying around upstairs. He was pushing for a divorce, and I was beginning to question whether I even needed one. In addition to the divorce papers was a paper notifying me that Mel was selling my house as part of the divorce settlement. I had 30 days to find a new living space or make other arrangements. The document also stated that I could buy our current home from Mel if I wished. Mel proposed divorce based on irreconcilable differences. No child support would be paid as Melissa had already turned 18. He intended to continue to support her, but the papers stated that her agreement would be separate from mine and I would have to discuss the details with her. I knew there would be no problem. Mel loved his daughter. She might be better off than I was. He offered me a small amount of child support for only 6 months and 40% of our savings and checking account balances. He excluded me from his retirement plan. If I didn't agree to this agreement, he would file a claim of infidelity, which I had already admitted to. There was too much information for me. Since the divorce was demanded by me, he would also not pay my attorney fees. This meant that my attorney fees would eat up any amount of money I received. In addition, under the circumstances, Mel was being generous with me regarding the house. He could have just thrown me out on the street. When we first bought the house, my name wasn't on the mortgage because I didn't want it on there. We weren't sure we could afford the payments, and if we lost the house or had to declare bankruptcy, we figured a good credit history for one of us wouldn't hurt. Since the house was in Mel's name, he could just kick me out, especially since I had cheated on him and brought Greg to live in the house. As these thoughts ran through my head, I realized I was in trouble. For over 20 years, Mel had run our whole life. He paid all the bills, took out the mortgage, bought the cars, and did everything else. I wasn't sure I knew how to find a new place to live, let alone how to pay for it. Mel was also a gentleman by not emptying our bank accounts. He only withdrew 50% from our accounts and savings. This meant that all the money in the accounts didn't belong to me. If I spent more than 40% of the former total balance, I would have to pay the money back. The bigger problem was the house. Our house was worth about $200,000. That meant that if the house sold for that amount, I would get $80,000. But if I wanted to live in it, I would have to pay Mel $120,000. I wasn't sure I could get a mortgage or loan for that amount, especially since I had no job or credit. I also couldn't take out any kind of loan against the property because, again, the house wasn't in my name, so I had no equity on paper. I needed to find the cheapest lawyer I could find, and as soon as possible. I needed to talk to Mel to see if there was any way out of this situation. Maybe I could just give him the house in exchange for him letting me live in it until I got back on my feet. That would give me a few months to figure out what I wanted to do about the divorce. Mel and I really needed to talk. The problem was that he just didn't want to talk to me. I decided that I needed someone to stand up for me. I called my dad and asked if he would call Mel for me. He said no. "Melinda, you are my daughter. I'm very shocked and disappointed by this whole situation. This man has turned out to be a much better son-in-law than I expected. I need to call him soon. I need to apologize to him for our last phone conversation. He called me a couple days ago trying to make arrangements to spend time with your mom and me on our anniversary. I finally got to him asking why he couldn't make it to the barbecue. He didn't come because he didn't want any drama or distractions going on at our anniversary. I couldn't believe what he said you did to him." My mother's voice came in the background. "And then you showed up with that bully and ruined our holiday. Truth be told, I wish Mel had come to the barbecue instead of you, so if you're trying to convince me to introduce him to you, forget it. He's suffering enough as it is. Give him some peace. You wanted a divorce. He's giving it to you. Although if it were me, if I were married to you and you tried to do something like that, I'd kick your ass." After that, the father hung up the phone. I decided to call my daughter and see if she would help me. After all, she wanted us to get back together. Melissa was even less helpful than her grandparents. She didn't want to talk to me at all. I called her cell phone several times, but the receiver was immediately transferred to voicemail. The third time I called, she changed her greeting to one tailor-made for me. "Hello, this is Melissa. I can't take your call right now. Leave a message at the beep, unless you're my ex-mother, in which case you shouldn't call or leave a message because I don't want to hear from you. Bye?" Selfishness has its price, and although I didn't realize it, I was just beginning to pay it. The divorce was handled by Ann Wilson. She was a wonderful woman. Despite her initial attitude toward me during our first meeting, I noticed that she was very caring and concerned about my well-being. She called me every day to let me know what was going on and what I could expect as a result. She let me know right after Melinda received the subpoena. She also asked me what I wanted to do in each particular situation. Some of the things she wanted me to do seemed wrong to me. She suggested that I take an extended leave of absence from work. That way I would have no income and could get by without paying Melinda child support. I loved my job, but the thought of being tied to Melinda for any length of time was beyond me. There were a few ideas that I often wished I had time for. There were also a few places I wanted to see or visit. Perhaps the idea of taking a vacation from work wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. "Dad, this place is perfect. It's big as a damn house. It has 3 bedrooms. And I love the pool. And the gym will help you not have to go to the gym. I think you should take it," my daughter Melissa said. I brought Lisa to the apartment I was going to rent. I had already decided I liked her. The monthly fee was high, but they had options for 6-month and 1-year leases. At this point, a 6-month lease while I looked for a house seemed like the perfect option. Melissa had been behaving wonderfully the last few days. She lived with her grandparents to be close to me and drove to and from school every day. Without her support, I wasn't sure I would have made it through. Joyce was great too. She took it upon herself to take care of me and, even though it was too soon, had already started trying to set me up with someone else. Just because you picked up one apple with a worm doesn't mean you have to give up apples, she said. It only takes me 15 to 20 minutes to find someone you'll be happy with. Over the past week, I've become less hurt. I wasn't as angry with Melinda anymore, and I understood her position to some extent. If she really wasn't happy with me, she deserved to be with someone who could make her happy. The only thing that annoyed me was the way she did it, and how unceremoniously she announced it to me. In the years we'd spent together, I deserved better than that. Perhaps I would have respected her more if she had come to me and told me she wasn't happy. Perhaps she would have given me a chance to change our lives to make her happy. There's nothing I wouldn't have done for her. But she chose to find a boyfriend and then tell me she wanted a divorce. And now she seems like she wants to talk about everything and try to be friends. Screw her. I can make my own friends. I called the complex manager and told her I'd take this apartment. It was ready to move in, so I'll write him a check in the morning, and I want to move in this weekend. After kissing Lissa goodbye before she left for her grandparents, I knew I was going to be okay. I remembered how my parents made me take piano lessons when I was 8 years old. My piano teacher, Mrs. Lipscomb, taught me how to rhyme so I could remember lines from the notes. E, G, B, D, F. Every good boy does fine. I tried to be a good boy my whole damn life. I was good at it. At first, when Mel brought it all down on me, I saw no way out. Just misery and loneliness, but I started to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I was in trouble and I knew it. Greg had emptied his savings account to buy himself a car. Over the past 2 weeks, I had begun to question why I wanted to be with him at all. Not only had he moved into the house without asking, he started using the house as a hangout for all of his friends. They would stop by his house at all hours of the day and night, and many of his friends were women. Then he started bugging me that we didn't really have an equal relationship. We didn't separate and divide each other. He didn't understand why I could do it with Mel and he couldn't. So I gave him a key and foolishly gave him access to my bank account. And within a week, he had completely emptied his savings account to buy a used Honda. I tried to explain to him that the divorce seemed to be in full swing. It looked like Mel was going to get his 60%. I agreed, so as not to be labeled an adulterer and to keep Greg out of it. Mel also didn't want to give me any favors with the house. We only had 2 weeks left, and at the rate things were going, we wouldn't have enough money to buy another house. I might have to move into an apartment. Even worse was finding out that Mel was going to take a break from work for a few months, maybe a couple years, until he got out of the depression that our breakup had put him in. That meant he would have no income, which meant I probably wouldn't get child support. He was even letting his daughter down. As I learned from my sister, Melissa was now living with my parents to emotionally support my father. This weekend, she was supposedly going to move out of the house, so he probably wasn't giving her enough money to stay on campus. Last night was the worst. After trying to put the house in order because of the mess Greg and his friends seemed to be leaving everywhere, I went out on the terrace to relax a bit. I think I dozed off. I woke up to someone tapping me on the shoulder. It was Greg, of course. He wanted to have some fun. "Greg," I shouted, pushing him away from me. "If you really loved me and wanted us to be together forever, you wouldn't have a problem with that," he said. "I suppose next time you'll want me to move out." And I didn't know if I was doing this because I really thought he was suffering, or because if I let this relationship fall apart, it would mean I'd thrown my marriage away for nothing. "No, Greg," I said. "Well, why not? Don't be like that," he said. "I'm not in the mood," I exclaimed. "Good night." "I bet you'd be in the mood if I were Mel, wouldn't you?" He snapped at me. Then he left the room, slamming the door behind him. I'm not sure if I felt relieved or saddened that he was gone, but I thought about his question and knew what the answer would be. By then, I was beginning to realize what I had done was stupid. The only problem was that I had no exit strategy. Greg told me that he would start work in a few weeks and that things would work out after that. He needed a car to commute to and from work and had a good deal on it. I got up about an hour after he left. I was embarrassed that we had a fight and I wanted to talk about it. Our relationship was spiraling out of control. In some ways, it was similar to what had happened with Mel. In my marriage to Mel, I should have talked to him about my feelings. If I had, maybe we would still be together. I swore I wouldn't make that mistake with Greg. Greg couldn't change if I didn't talk to him about things I didn't like. We were from different generations and had different lifestyles. There was bound to be conflict between us. I went down to the living room and heard some sound. One of Greg's damn friends is entertaining some woman in my house, I thought. When I entered the room, I saw that I was right, only it wasn't one of Greg's friends. It was Greg himself. I know you're upset, he said, but it's really your fault. You're the one who said no. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked out onto the deck. I sat down in one of the chaise lounges I'd seen online that Mel had painstakingly made and painted to make me happy. As I sat in the lounger, I noticed that the other 3 loungers from the set had been thrown into the pool, and the chlorine was already starting to wash the paint off of them. I just started crying and praying to wake up, and it turned out to be just a scary dream. I fell asleep sitting by the pool again. When I woke up the next morning, I looked at the clock. I was freezing. I had slept outside and Greg hadn't come in and woke me up. Plus, I was late for my meeting with the lawyers to sign the final divorce agreement. I walked up to the house, but the door was closed. Not just closed, but locked. I started knocking on the door, and after about 10 minutes, the girl Greg had entertained last night let me in. She didn't say anything. She just opened the door and left. She was walking back up the stairs when I called out to her. "Where are you going?" I asked. "To bed," she yawned sleepily. "You're not sleeping in my room," I said. "Greg said I could," she muttered. "Get out of my house or I'll call the police," I yelled. "Screw you, Grandma," she snapped back. "I've been kicked out of much better homes than this one. I'll be glad when Greg leaves you. You just suck the fun out of everything." I took a quick shower and changed into more or less decent clothes. I noticed that someone had gone through my purse and all my cash was gone. I jumped in my car and drove to Mel's attorney's office. The man who represented my interests was there as well. I sat through about half an hour of legal chatter and signed the papers where I was told to. "The divorce will be final in 90 days, Mel's attorney said. "Wait," I asked. "Where's my husband?" "You don't have a husband anymore," said Mel's attorney, a big angry woman. "But I still have 90 days to change my mind, right?" I asked. I knew I didn't need 90 days. I didn't need 90 minutes. I wanted Mel to come home and help me kick those bastards out of our house. "I thought I'd talk to Mel," I said. "Maybe it's not too late to change things?" "It could be my fault," my lawyer said. "In 90% of cases like this, although it's not necessary, both parties are usually present in case something goes wrong. That doesn't mean he had to be present. It was just expected." "He's not coming," Mel's attorney said. "He signed the papers 3 days ago. He wants nothing more to do with you. He's not even in town right now. He's gone on a cruise with his daughter. They call it a freedom cruise. I think you know why." I sat back and watched the woman. She seemed to take great pleasure in the fact that I was miserable. "What if I change my mind?" I whined. They both looked at me and shook their heads. I could see that none of this meant anything to them. It was just another job. They started putting papers into folders and briefcases and barely paid attention to me. "I want to talk to Mel," I shouted. I want my husband back." I got the impression that none of them cared what I wanted. I was sure the woman was trying hard not to laugh. I grabbed her by the shoulders. She looked at my lawyer, as if asking him if he saw me grab her. I got the feeling that if I didn't let go of her, I was going to get hurt. So I quickly backed off and tried a different tactic. "You are a woman," I said. "Don't you sympathize with me? I've made a big mistake. Can't you help me?" "Why should I?" she asked coldly. Coldly, she asked. "Besides, I can't give you the help you need." She put the briefcase back on the table and turned to me. "I rarely handle divorce cases involving men," she began. "I enjoy defending women who have been treated unfairly by their spouses. In your husband's case, I made an exception because when I first saw him, he was in so much pain that he reminded me of the worst women I had imagined. He was just in shock at what you had done to him. If I hadn't helped him pull his head out of his ass, he probably would have just given you all his money and his house just to get rid of you." "But," I started. Her face took on a harder expression. "But nothing," she snapped back. "Do you know how many women are abused by their husbands? They're cheated on, they're beaten, they're robbed, they're ignored. Most of those women would die for a man like the one you just shit on in their lives. You put that poor man through hell. Now he's finally free of you and starting to move on with his life, but things aren't going well for your boyfriend, so you decide you want your husband back. Tough shit, bitch. Life goes on. She turned and picked up her briefcase, then gestured for me to leave her office because she was leaving too. 3 weeks after signing the divorce papers, Melissa and I returned from our cruise, and I started fiddling around in my workshop. I remember it in great detail. It was one of those moments we never forget. I don't know why I didn't think of it sooner. I had the idea of connecting the servo controller directly to its own processor and sensor. I made 3 of these controllers just to test them out. The next day, I took one of them to one of my company's factories. Together with one of our equipment repair technicians, I hooked it up to a machine that wasn't working. Everything was great. My module allowed the machine to sense approaching objects around it and move to avoid them, without having to put it in the program. I felt like I was onto something. I had another friend who was into robotics. I gave him one of my modules. I went home, finalized the remaining module, and applied for my first patent a few days later. I worked with one of those companies that specialize in bringing inventions to market, and things moved very quickly. Literally hundreds of companies wanted to license my patent, and even more, who were interested in buying ready-made modules. I had to hire a lawyer and an accountant. We created 2 small companies. One handled licensing my patent and everything else I invented. The other handled the production of the modules. We outsourced production to a small local store that was struggling to keep its doors open. My plan was to eventually buy out the store and keep the owner as manager. In less than 3 months, I had more money than I knew what to do with. Melissa and I moved into a house that was even bigger than the one we lived in with her mother. I hired Joyce from my old company because I couldn't think of who I preferred as an assistant. Melissa had also worked for me while she was in high school. She was starting to think about changing her major from liberal arts to business. My in-laws, with whom we were still very friendly, rejoiced at our success. They called and invited us to Thanksgiving dinner. Bob said I shouldn't worry about Melinda's presence. She hadn't been welcome in their home since the anniversary fiasco when she brought that man, as they called Greg. I agreed for both Melissa and myself. After hanging up the phone, I walked out to the pool where my daughter and a few of her friends were sunbathing. Mel, just out of curiosity, have you heard from your mother lately? I asked. No. She got up and walked me into the house, leaving her friends to sunbathe. Daddy, she's been calling so often that I had to change our number, Melissa said. I don't know what's wrong with her. You gave her so much money. Heck, the money from the sale of the house alone should have been enough for 2 or 3 years of trouble-free living while she looked for a job or went back to school. I don't know what happened to her common sense. Now she lives with Greg in a crappy little apartment downtown. Almost all of her money is gone. I've heard horrible things about him and his friends from people I know at school who also know them. I looked at her seriously. Dad, if you find out about this, it will only hurt you. Let's just live our lives. Besides, don't you have a date tonight? I smiled thinking about it. I was on my 3rd date with a woman I'd met on the cruise. Even though we had gotten along great on the ship, it had taken me a long time to get along with her after I got home. It was mostly my fault. I just couldn't think of a reason to call her. Finally, as soon as I had the patent in place, she called me. Turns out my nosy daughter was sick of me messing around in the apartment all day, so she called her. Melanie Fitzgerald was a widow. Her husband had died in the service 5 years before we met on the cruise. What brought us together was that we had both lost someone we loved deeply. It was very important to both of us, and we gradually came out of our shells. By the time Melissa brought us back together, we both missed each other, but I didn't know how to reach out. Our first date was a traditional dinner and a trip to the movies. On our second date, we danced at a club, and tonight we were going to go on a river cruise, have dinner and dance some more. I hoped it would go as well as it did on the first 2 dates. I especially enjoyed dancing with her. The feelings I had when she pressed her whole body against me let me know that everything was going to be okay. I got kicked in the teeth by Melinda's act, but I got up and moved on with my life. I got into my Mustang and headed towards Melanie's house. As soon as I started the engine, the stereo came on, which almost made me dizzy. Melissa had driven my car to the store this morning and had one of her CDs playing. She was listening to Ozzy Osbourne's song, I Don't Want to Stop. I turned the volume down a bit and then smiled and let it blast. It was a great driving song anyway. As I pulled away from the curb, I noticed another car coming from the opposite direction, but I paid no attention to it. I drove toward Melanie's house, listening to Ozzy yelling about how he wasn't going to stop. My whole life I've been high. I don't know what I'm doing. I just know I don't want to stop. Yep, you and me, Ozzy, I thought to myself. I hadn't noticed until that moment that there was a car following me, a brightly colored Honda. The car looked like something out of a circus. It was one of those cars that only a teenager who has watched Fast and Furious too many times can drive. The guy was probably following me, hoping I'd overtake him. As I pulled up to Melanie's house, I got out of the car. I turned off the stereo because she lived in a nice neighborhood. Melanie was wearing a very pretty gray velour dress that fit her curves perfectly. She stepped off the porch and literally ran up to me as soon as I got out of the car. She hugged me tightly and even kissed me. It was the first time we had actually kissed. "I'm so excited about this," she said. "Come on," I said. "We've been on bigger and probably much nicer boats together." "It's not about the boat, honey," she said. "It's about being with you. I've missed you. I haven't seen you in 2 days, and after what happened on our last date, I still can't recover. I think we're going to have to rethink our policy of not seeing each other often during the week. Talking to you on the phone is great, but it's not enough." We both turned around as we heard the car door slam shut behind us. Melinda climbed out of the clown's Honda and sauntered briskly toward us. "Get your hands off him," she yelled. I quickly stepped between Melanie and Melinda. "Melanie Fitzgerald, this is my ex-wife Melinda Harris," I said. "This is Melinda Conrad," Melinda snapped back. "Can I talk to you, Mel?" she asked. "We have nothing to talk about," I said. "I've fulfilled all the terms of our divorce agreement. You didn't get your alimony check last week because alimony ran out 2 months ago. I was kind enough to give you another check last month, but I'm done. We don't have any connection anymore. So if you'll excuse us." "Mel, we'll always be connected. We have a daughter in common," she said. "Melissa is a grown woman," I said. "Your relationship with her is none of my business. I cannot and will not try to influence her one way or the other." "But Mel, what if I make a mistake?" she asked. "Then you'll pick up the pieces and move on with your life like I had to," I said. "I made a mistake. I chose the wrong woman to fall in love with, and it came back to hurt me 20 years later. For a while, I didn't think I'd make it. But now my life is beautiful again. You can get your life back together too." "Mel, we need to talk. I have a lot of things to tell you," she said. "And I don't like the idea of you dating anyone until we figure this out. I didn't like the idea of you having fun with someone while we were married, but it didn't seem to bother you. So what I do now that we're divorced is none of your business, Melinda. We have nothing to talk about." I opened the door and helped Melanie into her seat. Then I got in my car and drove away, leaving Melinda standing still. 2 weeks later, I sat at my desk and pondered an important question. I wasn't sure if I was rushing things in my and Melanie's relationship. What we had was great, but I wanted more. The door opened and there she was. When I saw her enter the office and head toward me with a wide, beautiful smile, I quickly tried to shove the papers I was looking through under my desk. This was one of my problems. Melanie made me feel special every time I saw her. Like when she saw me, she was just minding her own business. With Melinda, it was different. Everything I did for Melinda, she took it as if it was something deserved. She never appreciated anything. Perhaps that was what led to our breakup more than anything else. "Let me see what you're so interested in. Whatever it is, I'll try it for you." Melanie had a knack for making me just melt. So when she reached down and pulled out the papers I was trying to hide, I just let her take them. She looked at them, and what I was looking at registered. I had thought her smile was bright before, but now it was even brighter. "Mel, are you looking at them for me?" "For us?" she asked. I nodded. "Do you really want me?" she asked. I nodded again. She cried and threw herself on top of me. My office chair failed and toppled over, dropping us both to the floor. Joyce ran into the office and found us on the floor hugging each other. "I hate to interrupt you, but you have to see this," Joyce smirked. She led us both through the outer office to a conference room. In the hallway, we saw about 20 people applying for jobs with us. Some were office workers or secretaries. Others were applying for jobs in the shop, producing my sensor modules. Look, Joyce said. She pointed to Greg. Human Resources flagged him because he claims to be a friend of yours. Well, in a way he is, I laughed. If it weren't for him, I'd still be married to Melinda. Should they hire him? She asked. Hell no, I said. Come on, Mel. Let's go buy a ring. Everything was resolved a short time after I introduced my husband to that woman. I was barely on my feet when I saw them together. He was still the shy, caring man I'd fallen in love with, the one I'd taken for granted. But it was like he was glowing. He was truly happy. I only realized it by the loud music he was turning on in his damn Mustang. And her body language was intimidating. She couldn't wait for him to come to her door. How stupid could she be? Doesn't she know that you can't let a guy know you want him too badly? You'll lose your edge. No sooner had his car touched down than she ran out of the house and pounced on him. I realized what she was going to do at the first opportunity. I approached them, determined to break them up. I had to get him away from this woman before it was too late. That morning, I made the decision to bring him back. I also had to get rid of Greg. What did I see in him? I guess I was a stupid, bored woman who thought she deserved better and thought her life was a dead end. I threw away the best part of my life. After I caught Greg cheating the first time, I let him convince me that it was my fault for denying him sex. That only opened the floodgates. Greg was now bringing women home at least a couple times a week. He told me we were in an open relationship. He reminded me that when we first met, I was still having sex with Mel. He didn't seem to think the fact that I was married to Mel was important. Greg's amusement had turned into a routine. Do you want to mess around with her? He asked. Before the man could answer, I got up and got dressed. I left my apartment and drove to my parents' house. It took a while, but I convinced them to let me in. I told them the whole story and they let me stay there for the night. While I was there, I noticed that there were new paintings on the mantle in the group. They were done on Thanksgiving, my mom told me as I looked at them. One of the paintings struck me in the heart. It depicted everyone who was at my parents' house for Thanksgiving dinner. There was a subgroup of friends and family in the center of the group. Between my parents stood Mel and that woman. Between them was my daughter Melissa. They both had their arms around Melissa and all three were cheek to cheek. Mel, and Mel together again. They were all smiling and clearly having fun. It was exactly like the picture we took of the three of us when our family was together. It seemed like my husband and daughter were filling in for me without a second thought. Even my own parents preferred their company to mine. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I looked at the photograph. Everything in me said to throw that damn picture against the wall or into the fire. It took more strength than I ever thought possible to just put the picture back on the mantle. I tried really hard to get it in the same place, if not the same place. What did you expect? Dad asked behind my back. I guess you thought they'd wait for you forever? Dad, you didn't even invite me to Thanksgiving, but you invited her, I cried. Honey, your boyfriend ruined our anniversary party. You made it clear that he was the one you wanted to be with, despite what everyone told you. You even gave up your own baby to be with him. This one. I can't call him a man because no matter how old he is, he acts like a spoiled brat. And that's exactly what you're acting like. The father sat down on the couch. My granddaughter told you she wasn't coming back to your house until you got rid of him. That was your own child. You let her leave this house. It made it clear to everyone that you thought being with him was more important than her, or us for that matter. Melvin tried to avoid seeing you. He let you get what you wanted. You can't blame him for trying to find someone he could be happy with. As for Thanksgiving, we told you on the anniversary that you couldn't bring that bastard you were with into our house. And you're still with him. We invited Mel to come to Thanksgiving because whether he's married to you or not, he's part of our family. He may not be your husband anymore, but he's still our son-in-law because he's the father of my granddaughter. And the woman he brought with him? He asked our permission first, unlike how you just showed up with your second asshole. Melanie is a wonderful woman. I like her a lot, and if Melvin couldn't get in touch with you, she is exactly who I would want for him and for my granddaughter. She is polite, courteous, and helpful. She is welcome in this home whenever she comes. She's not you, Melinda. She's not my daughter. But Melvin has a right to be happy too, so we should be happy if he finds her. But Daddy, I want him back, I shouted. He only shook his head. Melinda, from the way the three of them get along and what they talk about, it might be too late for that. Even if Melvin doesn't marry her, he still won't want to go back to you. You've hurt him badly. Why would he put himself in that position again? Listening to their conversation, I realized that Melissa was the one who pushed them towards each other. Perhaps she wasn't just looking for someone for Melvin. She was probably looking for someone to take your place in her life. Life's too short to be miserable all the time. You had a great life. You had a beautiful family. You didn't appreciate what you had, and then someone else came along and picked up what you threw away. After listening to him, I realized he was right. The next day, I went back to my little apartment and started cleaning. When Greg woke up, I told him it was time for him and all his friends to leave. As I cleaned, I found several delinquency notices and an eviction notice. I didn't know any of them had come in. I gave Greg access to my bank account so he could pay his bills. He hasn't paid any of them, and all the money is gone. Last week, he tried to get a job but was turned down. He told me that the company he wanted to work for was owned by Melvin. In a year, my husband has become more successful than I could have ever imagined. But unfortunately, he wanted nothing to do with me. Yesterday, I went to fill out a job application myself. I sat in a large room and filled out the form with many other people. When they started calling names, I felt like I had a good chance. Many of the people I sat with who had no skills came back with smiles and said they had gotten jobs. As I waited to be called, I got that feeling you get when someone looks at you. I turned to my left and looked out the large glass window. There was my daughter standing in the hallway at the entrance to the room. She was pointing at me and talking to another woman. The woman nodded her head a few times and walked into the room I was sitting in. She turned to the people conducting the interview and they shuffled their papers. The man behind the desk immediately called me. My number wasn't there and I was called by name. I walked into the interview room and sat down in front of the desk. There were 3 people sitting behind it. 2 of them were women. I felt even better about my chances. I was sure my daughter was ahead of me in line. And who knew what might happen if we all worked together? Maybe I'd get my family back after all. You don't have any work history, one of the women behind the counter said. She didn't ask me a question, she just said what she saw on my resume. Well, in a way I do, I said. I've been married for over 20 years to the man you all work for. Mr. Conrad doesn't believe in domesticity, the man said. Both women shook their heads. You don't have any skills either, the other woman said. It says here that you have a college degree. What institution did you get your degree from, and what was your specialty? Melvin and I met in college, I said. I got my degree from the same college as him, but not the same major. I remember that. Melvin probably remembers that too. Thank you so much for coming in this morning, the first woman said again. She stood up and held out her hand for me to shake. Did I get the job? I asked. When am I going to start work? What will I be doing? Will I be working alongside my husband and daughter? We have many more interviews to do before we make a final decision on any position, the man said. In any case, you will be contacted. He stood up and extended his hand as well. I got the feeling that everything they were saying was utter nonsense. What they really meant to say was, don't call us, we'll call you ourselves. As I left the room, I realized I was the first person they hadn't hired. I turned around and saw Melissa talking to the people who had just interviewed me. She nodded her head and, without even looking at me, walked down the hallway in the other direction. My own daughter had just ruined my chance of getting a job. I only had one way out. I needed to find a place to live and money for food. I would be too ashamed to go back and live with my parents. I had to apply for public assistance. After all the years Mel and I had paid taxes, they still owed me. Melinda Conrad, I blurted out when I heard my name. I walked into the office as the woman looked over the forms I had filled out. How much do I get? I asked. Mrs. Conrad, what income did you receive last year? Did you receive any amounts in cash or settlement in the last 12 months? Your finances are not well described. What property do you own? Are you responsible for any children? It states that you are recently divorced. Did you receive alimony or cash payments in that regard? Well, I received alimony for 6 months and $80,000 for the sale of the house, plus 40% of our checking and savings accounts, I said. The woman looked up at me. Are you kidding me? She asked. No, I said. You've squandered over $80,000 in less than a year and you expect… Get out of my office. My daughter Melinda walked into the office just as I was about to stop by Melanie's office for her last day of work. Melanie wanted to work through the end of the month so she wouldn't leave her boss unemployed, but we both decided she had no reason to work. If she just wanted something to do to keep her mind on work, there would be plenty of things for her to do here. Besides, Melanie is only 36 and I'm 41. Maybe we could work on getting Melissa a brother or sister. Hi, honey, I said, picking up my jacket. Are you coming to Melanie's going away party? Yes, Daddy, I wouldn't miss it, she replied. I just wanted to show you this. She handed me a statement that was stamped, rejected. Not true, I laughed. Yes, she laughed back. I just kissed her on the cheek, shook my head, and headed off to my new wife's party. I was enjoying my life again. Everything was the way it was supposed to be. I no longer felt any anger or resentment towards my ex, but my daughter probably still feels it. Rejection can be hard to come to terms with. Truth be told, I would love to hire Melinda and keep her close to where we work, so she could see us on a regular basis and see what she's pulled. They say the best revenge is a life well lived. I'd like Melinda to see how we live our lives. It would be tantamount to poking her in the face every time she looked at us. I wasn't going to retaliate or do anything to Melinda. I just let karma deal with her. I focused on being a good boy and making myself happy. As I walked out the door, I hesitated for a second, trying to find my car. There were two almost identical Mustangs parked next to the building in the parking lot, reserved for management. It took me a second to realize which one was mine. It was even worse at home because Melanie now drove the exact same car. I knew immediately which one was mine. In fact, it was easy to tell. It was my car with the license plate EGBDF. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and watch for the next video.